The US Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessant, who participated virtually in the Rome conference on the reconstruction of Ukraine, announced that the President of the United States, Donald Trump, has created and is heading the Ukraine Reconstruction Fund. According to the American Secretary of the Treasury, this fund will provide Ukraine with a much better economic future than it has had so far, and will also ensure that no company or organization involved in the Russian intervention against Ukraine can profit from this fund or from investments in Ukraine's reconstruction. Such a statement from the American Secretary of the Treasury can be considered strange, given the complete lack of understanding about how and under what circumstances the war in Ukraine will actually end. However, it is worth recalling that not long ago, there was a report that one of the largest American financial companies, BlackRock Investment, stopped searching for potential investors to create a multi-billion-dollar fund for the reconstruction of Ukraine precisely after Donald Trump's victory in the US presidential election. And the company's decision was directly influenced by the clear uncertainty surrounding the new American president's approach to ending the war in Ukraine. So it's clear that BlackRock decided its representatives would not be able to explain to investors their real prospects in the process of Ukraine's recovery in a situation where there is no understanding of how, under what conditions, or when the Russian-Ukrainian war will end. After it became known that the Americans had practically withdrawn from the process, the European Union emphasized that they would create their own fund for the reconstruction of Ukraine. And of course, Trump, who is used to leading every investment process he possibly can, immediately instructed his own Secretary of the Treasury to announce that he himself would create and head an investment fund that is to participate in the rebuilding of Ukraine. This is a response both to the actions of BlackRock, which refused to participate in the process, and to the actions of the Europeans, who emphasized that they would seek investors regardless of what the US president's policy toward Ukraine might be. And of course, even from a purely demonstrative standpoint, this is not a bad message for Ukraine. After all, it means that now Donald Trump will be personally interested in seeing the Russian-Ukrainian war come to an end, and in ensuring that American companies can take part in rebuilding Ukraine. All the more so, since the process will be overseen directly by the President of the United States himself. However, this does not answer the question of what tools Donald Trump intends to use to force Russian President Putin to end the Russian-Ukrainian war. After all, there is not even a clear understanding of what American policy will be regarding the continued arming of Ukraine. Yes, the process of supplying weapons to Ukraine has already resumed after the pause caused by the Pentagon's decision. But the amount of these weapons remains unclear, as does the question of whether aid to Ukraine will continue once the current package provided to our country is exhausted. Thanks to former US President Joe Biden and the corresponding decision of the American Congress, there has not yet been any aid directly associated with Donald Trump. And it is unknown whether there will be any at all. And if Trump truly wishes to invest in rebuilding Ukraine, he would obviously need to provide our country with weapons capable of stopping further Russian aggression. It is unclear what kind of sanctions pressure Trump would exert on the Russian Federation, or if there would be any at all. Currently, the American president insists that if Congress wants to pass a law imposing new sanctions against Russia, it must simultaneously give the President of the United States the tools not only to strengthen but also to ease the sanctions mechanism, including those sanctions that have already been imposed on the Russian Federation. We do not know how Donald Trump will use these powers, or whether there will be a situation in which, instead of strengthening, he will actually ease the sanctions against Russia in order to make a deal with Russian leader Putin, with whom he has already had 6 fruitless phone conversations. And I'm not sure we want here a 7th or even an 8th call if Putin manages to come up with new arguments for Donald Trump. After all, as we can see, the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio met with the Russian Federation's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, despite Trump's overt irritation with Putin's stance, and Rubio promised that American leaders would continue to talk with their deceitful Russian counterparts. The next question is no less important. Won't it turn out that Trump will force the Ukrainian leadership to make significant concessions to the Russian Federation just for the sake of at least achieving a ceasefire on the Russian-Ukrainian front? Because he will be interested in starting the process of rebuilding the Ukrainian economy as quickly as possible while he is still in the White House. And in this situation, he will not care at all what kind of Ukraine he is rebuilding. A democratic, Ukraine-centric one that will manage its own policy and its own vision of geopolitical choice, or a Ukraine that after the war will remain in obvious economic and political dependence on the Russian Federation. The leadership of the Russian Federation, taking advantage of Trump's interest, will impose its own political terms for ending the Russian-Ukrainian war on Kyiv and will gradually turn the neighboring state, even if not defeated, into a satellite of the Russian Federation, a kind of large Belarus, where alongside American investors, Russian Federation oligarchs will, through shell companies, control things. The very same oligarchs who are now happily financing Putin's war against our country. So when it comes to the investment fund that Donald Trump is supposed to create, there are certainly more questions than answers. However, the most important question is whether such a fund will be created at all. After all, we have already witnessed over these past months quite a few loud statements from both the American president himself and members of his administration, which were not backed up by anything concrete, but were made solely to create a nice image at one international conference or another. And the fact that following the results of the conference in Rome, we are talking specifically about Scott Bessant's speech and about the Trump Fund, shows that this information mechanism works like clockwork and really forces us to adapt to its outcomes. Thank you, friends. Stay on this channel and subscribe to it. Subscribe to my social networks, Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, Donatella, support channel development. Use the sponsorship feature on YouTube. Victory and peace. Good luck.